Kevin, thank you for reaching out to have me come up here. Appreciate to the MGA for having me here as well. I'm trying to de-stress after all those rules and regulations for what's coming your guys' way. It makes me think of when I was younger, before my dad would let me. I used to love wanting to go out and mow the lawn. I wanted to mow the lawn all the time. My dad would not let me use a gas-powered mower. He'd have me have one of those push non-electric ones for a little kid. And it seems like we might be going that direction here pretty soon. So, but yeah, my name is Garrett Bastardi. I am, like I said, the founder of UmbrellaWx. UmbrellaWx is a company that uses data, uses foresight when it comes to weather technology and data to help golf courses, athletic departments, sports fields make better decisions. We also work with business owners and basically people who need better weather data in order to make better decisions. UmbrellaWx is the kind of parent company of Turf Threat Tracker, which really specifies in working with golf course superintendents. We've worked with over 250 golf course superintendents across the country, everywhere from Maine to California, Florida to Washington. It has given myself and my team the last several years a lot of ammo to deal with when it comes to what superintendents deal with day in, day out when it comes to the weather, what they are looking for from a forecasting perspective, but then it helps us kind of communicate to them how we can better give them forecast data, give them forecast information in order to help them make decisions. And so the one thing that is clear and the most consistent burden that we see in talking to superintendents and going to trade shows and going to and speaking to chapter organizations is, how will the weather impact my golf course, my maintenance, the operations of the club in general. A superintendent can wear a lot of hats, and one of the hats ends up being, the resident meteorologist on site sometimes. A little background on myself: I graduated from Penn State. I am a third-generation forecaster. My grandfather, a meteorology graduate of Texas A&M. My dad was a chief forecaster at AccuWeather for 30 plus years, and now partially runs his own company. Yeah, I studied meteorology and political science at Penn State. I thought for a little bit that I might go into policy advising, and then I decided I definitely did not want to do that, given the current state of affairs. Was able to play golf from a very early age, and in playing golf and being at the golf course every single day, I very much enjoyed hanging out and talking to the superintendent, the assistant, the guys working out on the golf course. I never really had a whole lot of interest in going into PGM or being in the pro shop or anything like that. In another world, I tell superintendents all the time, I really respect what they do, and that might be, in another world, that might have been something that I would have gone into. And being a superintendent, I just have always had a very keen interest in that. And so to be able to marry the weather, which is a very strong passion of mine, and golf and athletics, which are also strong passions of mine, it's been a very cool experience for me to work with turfgrass managers in this light. And so jumping into things after the background, the weather is important, and we all know this, but I've gone to several different chapter organizations. I've spoken at the National Trade Show, did a half-day seminar at the GCSA show last year in Orlando, and we send out these little surveys pre-hand. And I didn't send out a survey for this one because when we say where would you rank the weather in its importance to your operations, there's not a lot of things, I guess, in today's world that we all agree on. But to have 41 respondents to this and every single one say that the weather is very important, it's pretty conclusive that the weather is something that a superintendent has to deal with every single day. It is something that they have to base their short-term decisions off of, whether it comes to labor or mowing schedules or whatever it might be. The weather is going to play a massive role in their job. And in thinking about this, and in talking to so many different superintendents, a few I see in here that I have been able to learn from and talk to, and they're so good at their job that if the weather was the same every day, 70 during the day, 50 at night, knew how much rain was coming each day, whatever it might be, their jobs would probably be able to be on autopilot. The thing that throws the biggest wrench into what they do, based off the feedback that we get, is going to be the weather, right? And so superintendents and the maintenance staff have to plan their days, their weeks, months ahead around what the weather is going to do. The better information they can have, the better decisions they can make. The weather is typically the biggest variable on a given golf course. You can have localized events. You can have, based off the elevation that you are, the elevation that you are, sitting at a golf course, your relativeness to water. All of these different things can play such big roles on the weather at your golf course. So it's the biggest variable in the short, medium, long term. And so it will affect the work that a superintendent will have to do on their golf course, and it will affect the playability of the golf course as well. And so I'm going to kind of walk through, briefly from the feedback that we've gotten from superintendents, what the short term, the daily operational stuff that comes to, some of the daily decisions that are impacted by the weather, and that's going to be labor management. If we get questions all the time. Okay, big rainstorm is coming. If I can hold off on, bringing in hourly workers, right, from 6 a.m. to noon, because I know it's going to be a complete washout in the morning, that can end up saving the golf course, a good amount of money that morning, right? That can save the operations amount of money, where it says, okay, I'm not going to bring in these 15 hourly workers or 5 hourly workers, whatever it may be, to mow, because nobody's getting on the golf course this morning. Or, we at T3, we have a forecast tool that projects frost out, right? So we have superintendents that tell us, well, if I can go ahead and tell my pro shop ahead of time, okay, this frost projector is showing 95% chance of frost for Saturday morning, and it's telling me this on Thursday night, I can go ahead and tell the pro shop, hey, we're not getting a mower on the grass until at least 9 in the morning. So we might as well push everything back a couple hours. I'm not bringing my guys in until 9 instead of 7. And so these are some of the short-term daily decisions that we see that we see occur, impacted directly by the weather. Mowing, spraying, watering times and amounts. The wind on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, can significantly affect when a superintendent is going to spray. How much are they going to water based off of how much rain has fallen, how much ET or evapotranspiration has occurred on the golf course, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But all of these things can be impacted just on a daily, hourly basis. The course setup, especially during tournament and club events, superintendents will look at the wind, rainfall, how dry has it been. If the 12th hole on your golf course is the toughest hole, 450 yards, playing each day, but the prevailing wind is switched that day and it's now into your face, maybe they're going to move the tees up a couple tee boxes so not everybody's making a 6 on the hole instead of making 4. And then, whether to hold club events indoors or outdoors. We get questions all the time from our superintendents that we work with. It'll be a Friday morning, the member guest starts Saturday morning. We want to have, our dinner the night before. Do we want to have it indoors? Do we want to have it out on the patio? What's the weather going to look like? That is an example of, kind of a daily, question that we can see from a superintendent. Weekly operations and course maintenance, some weekly decisions that are impacted by the weather. When to spray certain chemicals, your plant growth regulators, your fungicides, looking at growing degree day forecasts. We get questions all the time talking about, hey, the target number that I'm looking for, it looks like it's going to reach 200 growing degree days on Saturday, and this is a week out. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's going to occur? We'll say, yeah, sure. And so they'll be able to go out and say, okay, I can plan, the weekend before that we're going to spray Friday morning or Saturday morning based off of a weekly forecast. Any contracted labor, doing tree work, snow removal, sand deliveries, whatever. We get these questions all the time, on a weekly basis, looking out 5, 7, 6, 7 days. Can we have these, can we have this work come in based off the weather? If it's gonna be a complete rain out, how are we gonna do a sand delivery if it's pouring all day? Or how are we gonna have guys going up and doing tree work if the weather is not good in any way, shape, or form? And so that can be something that is more on a weekly, operational time frame rather than a daily. And then, like we said, decisions about any club events are best made, days in advance rather than the day of. And then your long-term operations. I think a little bit about what Jim does, in restoration and, or I'm sorry, renovations and architecture and some of the long-term decisions that you're going to make on your golf course. You know, whether we should, you know, open a week early, whether we should like hold off a month. You know, this time of year is very important for when are we going to open our golf course back up? When are we going to get membership back playing? You know, taking into account really how wet has it been? You know, how wet has it been over the last 4, 5, 6 months? You know, yeah, maybe it's not freezing out, but can our soils handle, you know, foot traffic? Can they handle cart traffic? You know, we think about aerification schedule. You know, a lot of superintendents will have their aerification schedule set, but then, you know, again, if you know, and it's been a really, really wet 2 to 3 week stretch, maybe we should push it back a week. Maybe we should move it up. This can depend on the weather. We see these questions all the time. And now some will schedule regardless of the weather, you know, maybe because they do not have the access that maybe another golf course has to, you know, better information. But others will consider longer range forecasts as well. And then, like I mentioned, long-term projects and when to potentially schedule them, and then when to start looking at bringing back labor and opening up at the start of the season. How the weather impacts a golf course is a little bit more in my wheelhouse. You know, I'm speaking, I guess, talking about superintendents and how the job is impacted by the weather, kind of on behalf of that, but it's different for everybody. You know, how one person uses the weather for their operations might be completely different than another person. That's something that we see all the time, is that there are just a wide variance. And what we're trying to do at, you know, with my company and what we talk about all the time is, you know, how can we kind of bring that gap in a little bit rather than being so widely varied? Because there some better uniformity in the way that the weather is utilized could potentially pay dividends down the road, and you know, a lot of different ways of maintenance practices for golf course superintendents. But how the weather impacts course conditions obviously is very important. And also, a quick side note is very interesting. So has anybody ever had, you know, anybody have a cat? Anyone? Raise your hand. Pet cat. Anybody have a pet? Okay. So they naturally have an instinct, right? They'll have a, like, they're a kitten. How do they look out the window and automatically know they want to go kill that bird or something like that? My natural instinct up here as a meteorologist is to sit here and start like pointing at the TV and coming up like, oh, here's 35 degrees here, 75 degrees there. I'll look at this anvil like I'm on TV or something like that. So being up here is a little different staying from the mic. So I'm gonna move, this come off? Yeah, I'm gonna move down a little bit because I just feel more comfortable looking at the TV like this. So some weather background before we get into how the golf course is impacted by the weather. Dew point. Dew point is the temperature the air needs to be cooled in order to achieve a relative humidity of 100%. Okay, so what does that mean? In other words, the closer the air temperature is to dew point, the higher chance of dew or clouds or precipitation forming. So if your temperature is 55 degrees and your dew point is 55 degrees, it's either raining, it's either foggy, or there is very heavy dew on the ground, okay? If your dew point is 20 degrees below the air temperature, it's 55 degrees over 35 degrees, what you're gonna end up having is probably a pretty cloudless day, okay? Dew point continued. General comfort levels using dew point that can be expected during summer months. Anytime you're under 55 degrees during the summer, probably a pretty comfortable day. 75, 80 degree temperature, dew point's 55, dry and comfortable. You get in a little higher, 55 to 65 degrees. You know, it's gonna become sticky, it's gonna become muggy. You're gonna get, you know, probably your car fogging up, your windows fogging up, it's gonna be a little bit muggier. And then greater than or equal to 65 degrees, lots of air and moisture, probably oppressive, but one of those just nasty, you know, June, July days where it's very sticky, probably gonna end up raining. The reason why I bring this up is because we talk about humidity a lot, okay? We talk about humidity, oh, it's 100% humidity out, you know, it's 80% humidity out. What do you guys think the humidity today outside is? Any guesses? High, 100%, right? Did anybody sweat walking in here though? Right, so humidity isn't always directly related to how comfortable it is out, okay? So we kind of start pushing our superintendents and people who we talk to potentially look at the dew point number versus humidity, because humidity is not as good of a reference tool, and this is why. The higher the dew point rises, the greater amount of moisture in the air. It's a better reflection meteorologically of what's going on. This directly affects how comfortable it'll feel outside. Many times, relative humidity can be misleading. For example, a temperature of 30 and a dew point of 30 will give you a relative humidity of 100%. Nobody's going to think it's very warm and muggy when it's 30 over 30, right? It's going to be probably snowing. But at a temperature of 80 and a dew point of 60, that's going to be misleading because that's a relative humidity of 50%. Everybody's probably going to be sweating walking around doing that, okay? Oh, at a temperature and dew point of that. So it'll feel much more humid at the 80 over 60 than it will be the 30 over 30, even though there's a 50% difference in relative humidity in that number. This is from the National Weather Service. And so, in having conversations with membership, having conversations with your superintendent, the dew point number is probably more of a better reference tool than it would be versus using a humidity number. Another buzzword that could potentially be utilized in conversations, in the committee room with your superintendent is evapotranspiration, or ET. And I put this up here because we're really going to talk about this here in a second, because it's a very important number for the operations of a golf course. Evapotranspiration is the sum of all processes by which water moves from the land surface to the atmosphere via evaporation and transpiration. The evapotranspiration includes water evaporation in the atmosphere from the soil surface, evaporation from the, basically the plant and the groundwater table, and evaporation from the water bodies on land. Evapotranspiration also includes the transpiration part of things. Basically, how much the plant is sweating. In short, evapotranspiration is a transfer of water from the Earth's surface and the atmosphere, and it comprises the sum of evaporation from the soil and transpiration from the plant. Why is this important? We'll get to that here in a second. ET, we'll get to this on this slide actually. The ET increases with higher amounts of sunshine, wind speed, and temperatures. It is directly related to your daily weather, okay? You have a higher ET rate, odds are your golf course is going to be playing firmer. It's going to be playing faster. You're going to have to water more. It's going to affect your budget if you are affected, by having to use well water, whatever it might be, or you're paying for municipal water. A higher rate of ET is going to be reflected by stretches of drier conditions. Not always warmer conditions, but generally warmer conditions. And then dry northwest winds, especially in this area, is going to lead to a higher ET. On the flip side, your ET rate will decrease with lower amounts of sunshine, wind speed, and temperatures, generally less watering, generally softer conditions. Not always the case, but this is a general rule of thumb. Water affects everything. Rain, dew, evaporation, and transpiration rates will all influence soil conditions. More rain equals higher soil moisture content, higher dew points equal higher soil moisture content, and then less ET will equal higher soil moisture content. All of these factors will play into whether your golf course has higher or lower soil moisture, and will in turn lead to firmer, faster conditions versus slower and wetter conditions. The amount of rain that has fallen will impact the golf course in several ways. And a lot of this might seem pretty, yeah, of course it's raining, it's going to affect the golf course, but it's not always obvious how in turn it will affect the golf course. Your rate of growth, this will impact the amount of mowing, your sprays, your irrigation, and the timing of all of these things. Less rain will lead to less mowing, but more need to irrigate. More rain will lead to more mowing, but then less need to irrigate. Cloud cover's role. Cloud cover can be very important. The cloud cover, or the lack thereof, plays a significant role in how much sunlight gets through to the surface. A dry day with no cloud cover can impact playing conditions significantly. A dew-covered soft golf course can dry out by the afternoon if full sun is not impeded by cloud cover. An interesting story. A few years ago, the first year that T3 was kind of the turf retractor was being utilized. It was just before the Masters in 2021, I believe, and I don't know exactly where where exactly the forecasts were coming from for Augusta National that week, but that Thursday in particular, in the afternoon, the greens were getting real crusty, crustier than usual at Augusta National, and balls were kind of rolling off the green on the front of 15, and things were they weren't out of hand, but they were getting pushed to the limit more so than what we're used to. And what ended up occurring was, cloud cover was forecasted to come in the afternoon, and it was forecasted to lower ET rates a little bit, and dew points were actually forecasted to be about 5 degrees higher than what they were. And so we're talking about 20% cloud coverage in cloud cover, 5 degrees of dew point. These little rolls playing such a massive role in how a golf course can play by the end of the afternoon. So the golf course started in the morning pretty soft, pretty receptive. By the afternoon, 4, 5, 6 o'clock, the final group's coming through. Later in the evening, the golf course was really in a different stage than it was 12 hours prior, and that's how much things like cloud cover being in the area will keep the dew point a little bit higher, and that can significantly affect how much the golf course will play, or how the golf course will play, and how much firm and fast conditions we will see. A dry day with heavy cloud cover will have a big impact, but it'll be on the opposite end. Dew will stay around longer. Less sunlight through the surface will lead to soil conditions staying steady rather than drying out. The height of clouds can make a big difference, and so you could look outside and say, man, we have, I don't see the sun, 100% cloud cover, but where is the height of those clouds? Are they lower clouds? Are they higher clouds? High, thinner clouds do not have as much resistance to the sun letting sunlight through to the surface, allowing ETs and solar radiation to still remain high and basically have the same effect as a cloudless day. The image that we have here is just a look at solar radiation through a couple of days. So the first side, or whatever, the left side would be a day that there might be a little bit more intermittent cloud cover. On the right side, when there's no cloud cover, you get a nice bell curve with solar radiation coming through. And then on the opposite end, lower, thicker clouds will not let nearly as much sunlight through, keeping ETs and solar radiation lower, therefore keeping the golf course steadier throughout the day rather than drying out. Weather conditions generally favorable for a firm and fast golf course. Dry weather, lower dew points, like we mentioned before, less dew in the morning, low cloud cover, windy conditions. In this part of the country, preferably a dry wind out of the northwest or west-northwest, especially when you get a front coming through or a trough off the east coast, you tend to get dry Canadian air. Warm temperatures will help, but they're not always necessary. We saw this last year. The late spring into early summer wasn't exactly well above normal around here. It was actually slightly below normal in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, but it was so dry because what you had, you get a little weather talk here, what you get is anytime you get a trough and a ridge, low pressure and high pressure, generally troughs are accompanied with more active weather, but if they're off the east coast, if it's settled off the east, what you get is a flow out of Canada, okay? And so you get, instead of getting flow out of the southwest, more precipitation, what you get is a drier flow out of the northwest, but you're also getting the cooler air as well from Canada. And so, last year we had a dry, cool pattern. It wasn't necessarily warm, but we were still getting higher ETs. We were getting conditions, dried out on our golf courses. And all these things considered will lead to higher levels of evapotranspiration. Longer range weather conditions favorable for a firm and fast golf course. So, we're talking about, daily, experiences when it comes to the weather, talking about daily dew point, daily cloud cover, and all of that is very important, but we also have to consider what goes on, in the grand scheme of things. We have micro, weather elements, and then we have macro weather elements. And so, if you have, a couple days in a row with some rain, but it's been very dry for a 3-month stretch, your golf course will probably return back to the norm of which it's in that state, which will be pretty dry overall. It'll drain quicker, and the opposite will occur when it's been very wet for a long time. And so, an interesting thing to look at right now would be, if the winter has a lot of precipitation and it being more in the form of snow rather than rain, this will lead to potential for drier conditions earlier in the golf season. Why is that? So if I get 5 inches of rain versus 5 inches of the snow equivalent to rain, okay? Snow that falls, a good portion of that will evaporate. rather than going into the surface, right, and going into soils. When it's just purely rain, it's going into the ground. And so if you have an above normal snowfall, above normal winter when it comes to snowfall, what will end up happening is, generally, depending on a bunch of different conditions, you will actually be drier coming out in the spring rather than if you had a below normal snowfall but above normal precipitation and rainfall like we have seen this winter. And so, in general, lower precipitation, lower than normal precipitation over the winter will lead to higher potential of drier conditions earlier in the golf season. The ability for soils to thaw earlier in the spring will allow for more favorable drainage conditions. And then overall, generally in the spring, summer, and fall, extended periods of drier conditions as well as lower dew points and humidity will lead to conditions being generally favorable for a firm and fast golf course. On the flip side, goes without saying, generally wetter conditions, especially over the long term, are going to lead to a softer golf course. Cloudier conditions overall will lead due to linger, higher dew points, humidity to be higher. Little to no wind. If we have a stretch where there's just not a lot of wind, it's harder at times for the golf course to be able to dry out. And then all of these things, all these variables will lead to a lower ET, higher soil moisture content, and overall softer and slower conditions on the golf course. And so you look at longer range conditions, favorable for a softer golf course. A lot of the opposite impacts that we saw with drier conditions overall. Winter season being above normal precipitation, like we said, more in favor of rain over snow. In general, an above normal precipitation pattern will lead to a higher potential of wetter, softer conditions. A late spring will keep soils frozen longer, leading to poor drainage of any precipitation. That has been something that we have dealt with in the Northeast in the last several years, really since 2010, 2011. We've really had, there is some truth to the seasons having shifted a little bit, where in the fall, it's been generally a little bit nicer overall, but the springtime the winter has really hung on, and a lot of that has to do with, we can start getting into the depths of ocean temperatures and how that impacts, height patterns and all this different stuff, and we can go into a whole reason why that's occurring. Believe me, it's been that way the last several years, where it's been kind of a later spring. But overall this year, it hasn't necessarily been the case. Temperatures haven't been ridiculously below normal in March. The issue has been how much rain has occurred. Overall, in the spring, summer, and fall, extended periods of stormy or wetter conditions as well as higher dew points and humidity will lead to conditions generally favorable for cloudier conditions, lower ETs, and in turn, a softer golf course. Northeast golf courses this spring. To close out here, just a little look, for the next couple months. Warm and wet conditions over the course of the winter will lead to soggy soil conditions early in the season. Some areas are 10 to 12 inches above normal in rainfall. We can see this here. Now I get to stand and talk about weather now. So anywhere that you're seeing really in the light blue, from DC to Baltimore through the 95 corridor up to Philly and New York, and really up to Boston, you're looking at areas that have been 10 to 12 inches above normal rainfall. That is significantly above normal, and it has not been in the form of snow. And so have patience with your superintendents, especially early in the year. It's going to be a difficult slog through, tough soil conditions early. With that being said, it not being super cold does help the cause, but it has the same impact. The same impact that you would have, having deep frost and freezes through early April is generally the same impact you have with a lot of wet conditions going through March and April. It's going to be a slower start to the golf season from a weather perspective. Expect prolonged periods of cart restrictions. With a wet spring expected, it's expected to take months to really dry out. And morning fog, like we saw this morning, if you're driving up, right along the Hudson, morning fog is going to be an issue throughout the spring into the early summer. You're going to get those conditions of high dew points in the morning because the soil is so saturated, and so potentially fog delays in the morning could be something to deal with. With that said, the last 6 months temperatures have been slightly above normal, so that is something that is a bit of a positive when it comes to we're not going to have to. There's not going to be generally as much winter kill, generally as much of those issues that we see when we have those brutally cold winters, and those kind of get warm, then it then it gets cold, gets warm again, then gets cold. We're not going to be dealing with that as much. And so that's kind of what we're going to be looking at the next several months. And this is a way that we can take a look at the past to help project the future. A lot of our superintendents are utilizing that data in order to help them with how they're going to make decisions as well. And so, in conclusion, the weather plays a significant role in shaping course conditions from rainfall to humidity to temperature. Wind, ET, solar radiation, all these elements and all these variables can greatly influence your playing experience on the golf course, can greatly influence how the superintendent will manage the golf course as well. Superintendents and their teams work to monitor the weather both in short and long term to adjust their practices accordingly and uphold course quality. By understanding and effectively managing the impact of weather, golf courses can provide optimal playing conditions and enhance the overall experience at a given golf course. Yeah, that's kind of the spiel for today. I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll also be here, for the remainder of the day as well. And then in the future, any questions, email and website are here. But yeah, the weather is an ever changing ever-changing variable that I think plays a bigger role than maybe some of us think in how a superintendent is able to handle their job. And it's something that's not controlled, right, at all. And so, a lot of times, back in my home course, I go home and I hear all the stuff that, God, why is the golf course playing like this? Why is it playing like that? And me being able to have the understanding of the weather has given me a lot of perspective in the job that a superintendent does. And I think it's important to give some leeway there because it really they can do the best job in the world and it can get thrown out in a minute given a 3-hour rainstorm or a 5-hour thunderstorm, something like that. So all things to consider, but happy to answer any questions if anybody has me. Yes, sir.
All right, the last spring was cool and dry, and then the second half of the year was, all it did was rain.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like it stopped raining from last fall. Should we expect the opposite?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of this is driven by the El Nino pattern that we're in, which is currently in the process of collapsing. So there's a lag to that, much like there was a lag last year. So we went from a La Nina, which is generally a drier, warmer pattern, to a generally wetter pattern with the El Nino. The next several months, we should expect a continuation of what we've seen, the last 6 to 8 months, which it will be wetter than normal. As we get towards the latter part of the summer, though, we're going to have more of a La Nina reaction. So by May, we're going to be in a La Nina again. Okay, so El Nino, La Nina, these are oceanic patterns in the Pacific that have a significant impact on the patterns in the U.S. And especially on the East Coast. And so early summer, generally wetter than normal. By the time we get to the end of the summer, generally warmer, drier than normal. But with this being said, the wild card later in the summer and into the fall is going to be with record warm Atlantic Ocean temperatures and flipping from a El Nino to a La Nina, which is a very favorable pattern for Atlantic tropical activity. We will have to potentially deal with, what we saw in 2021, where there was 2020 into 2021, several tropical events that made their way up here. So that would be a wild card as we get later into the fall and later into the summer into the fall. Yes, sir.
For science, how much does those microclimates play in what you're able to help them with?
Mm-hmm.
Do you need to install local data collection to try to feed data into what you guys are doing?
Yeah, what's really cool about what we do is we do not have to do that. And so our model is built on, if you imagine grids laid on the surface of the earth, at how every weather model works is they're all grids at each intersection of a grid point, that's a forecast point. And so generally what you see are zip code forecasts, right? You put your zip code into your phone or whatever, or Weather Underground, whatever it may be, and you get this generalized forecast. Our model, what we do is really 1/100th the size of that grid. And so it's about generally the size of a golf course. And so we put a pretty high resolution latitude and longitude into our system, and then we're able to utilize that data and send it to our superintendents, and then they get all that forecast data listed directly for their property. And so the site specificity of it, being able to take into account the localized effects of elevation, or, you know, what effect the Hudson might have on, you know, a golf course that's close to there rather than one that's 10 miles away from that same body of water. Our model can kind of discern those two to the best of that a model can, right? It's not gospel, but it can do a better job.